Welcome to Busy Mom Talk, real talk for real moms. I'm your host, Kia, mom of two. So if you're juggling kids, coffee, and chaos, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for educational purposes only, and every individual should seek medical advice from their own medical professional regarding their medical status. So welcome back to another episode of Busy Mom Talk. Today we have a really important guest, Dr. Stuart Fischbein, and most of you guys know him as Dr. Stu, an OB-GYN who broke away from the hospital model to support midwives and out-of-hospital births. He's been a fearless advocate for informed choice, breech, twin vaginal births, and respectful maternity care for over 35 years. And Dr. Stu, I am so thankful and honored to have you here today. So thanks for joining me. I know our listeners are in for a real treat. So before we dive in, would you mind introducing yourself in your own words?
Thank you, Kia. Yeah, it's always an honor for me to be on a podcast where I might reach an audience that I don't normally reach. So thank you for having me on. My name is Stuart Fischbein. I was born and raised in Minnesota, so I'm not that far from Canada. I had a lot of friends from Winnipeg. We had an exchange program when I was growing up. I went to University of Minnesota Medical School. I did my residency at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. I had the good fortune in the early 1980s when I was doing my residency of being affiliated with the busiest hospital in the United States for obstetrics, which was LA County USC Women's Hospital. They were doing about 22,000 births a year there, which is, if you break it down, is about 65 babies a day. I was there for 4 months every other day. So that's 60, you can do the math, and that's a lot of births. And so I was exposed to all the types of problems that you might encounter in pregnancy and all the types of things that aren't problems, except that as residents, we are taught that pregnancy itself is a high-risk condition and that everything needs to be managed. And that's the model by which doctors today are still trained. I came out of residency program very well skilled and knowledgeable in my narrow little lane. And that's all I knew. And I thought that was everything. And I had the good fortune, along with ending up at Cedars-Sinai and USC, was when I first started practice, it was a different era. You didn't come out like you do now and get a job, working for a company, getting a salary, working a shift, and having a boss. You came out being your own boss, setting up your shingle, so to speak, and building a practice from scratch. And the way you did that in those days, at least in Southern California, was you hustled. You covered emergency rooms. You volunteered at free clinics. You covered other doctors when they were on vacation. You assisted them when they were in surgery. And slowly but surely, you built up a practice. And one of the things that happened early in my career, which changed the course of my life, was that I was approached by the local midwives in Southern California and asked if I would take their home birth transports. And of course, I said yes. But I didn't say yes because of the reasons I would have said yes now. I said yes then because I wanted to make money. Every transport was several $1,000s of insurance money, and that was a really good thing for me starting out in practice. But it was fortuitous because I got to spend a lot of time with the midwives while the women that were transported, almost all non-emergently, almost all just needing rest in maybe an epidural and maybe some Pitocin, and would go on and deliver vaginally. I got to spend a lot of time with the midwives, and I began to befriend them and listen to what they were saying. And they began asking me questions and telling me about the way they practice. And a lot of it made sense, what they were doing. And a lot of the things they asked me about made no sense whatsoever. Why was I doing this? Why was I doing that? Why is she on her back? Why are you washing off her bottom? Why does the cord get cut right away? Why do you walk the baby over to the warmer? Why are you dressed in a full hazmat suit? To catch why, and none of those things had ever entered my mind before the midwives started to bring them up. And because I'm blessed with my parents and my curious mind, I began to challenge the traditional thinking. And that doesn't sit well with a system that is it's all about indoctrination and all about compliance and all about protocols and algorithms, and all women, all diabetics need to be treated the same. All twins, diamniotic, dichorionic twins need to be treated the same. And it's like, well, actually, that's not true. And you don't really need to do that. And so I started a collaborative practice with midwives in the hospital for a while because it was a great opportunity to let the midwives do the normal stuff and let me do the complicated stuff. And after 10 years in practice, I started that. And for the next 15 years, I practiced that way. But we were never accepted in the community. And eventually they decided that we made them nervous, that I was doing breeches and twins. And we had a 7% C-section rate when everyone else had like a 25, 26% C-section rate. And this is in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so they found a way to essentially ban the midwives and then ban breech and then ban VBAC. And then, well, not necessarily in that order. And then they were not going to renew my privileges. And so I was sort of forced to make a decision of going the legal route and challenging them legally, which is it's David and Goliath, except that David rarely wins, and or going off and doing home birthing. And because I had such good community relationships with the midwives and the doulas in my community, they encouraged me to do it. And I went off and I started doing home birthing, and it was the best career move that I've ever made because it freed me up from some of the stupidity that goes on in the hospital and some of the rigidity. And I got to individualize my care even more. And I got to spend as much time with the client as I did. I could charge what I wanted. I didn't have to deal with insurance companies anymore. Didn't have to deal with malpractice companies anymore. There were, no lawyers involved. It was really a liberating thing that I wish more of my colleagues would realize, because I think a lot of my colleagues that are in the hamster wheel of the medical system are not very happy. And how do I know that? Because happy people generally don't treat people poorly. And you hear story after story after story of a woman going to the hospital and her autonomy being denied, and she's being spoken to in a condescending fashion, that sort of thing. So I don't think happy people do that. And so I ended up doing home birthing, and then I got bolder. And then I said, well, if I can do breech in the hospital, why don't I do breech at home? And then twins, and then type 1 diabetics, and then hypertensives, and that sort of thing. And I began to individualize my care, and I made a career out of it. I did that for 12 and a half more years. So in total, since I started my residency, I practiced for about 40 years. But yeah, I was on call every night because as a solo practitioner, all the midwives listening know, and all the doulas listening are going to know that you are always on call because labor is not something that's predictable. And it wore on me, and I got older, unfortunately, as people do. And so about 3 years ago, I decided to stop doing clinical practice, and now I just teach both online. I do meetings online. I do interviews online. And then I go around the world and I teach a 2-day seminar, which we call Reteach Breech, which also includes twin skills and also common sense skills, things about informed consent, things about why doctors do the things that they do, even though the outcomes from their system seem to just be getting worse and worse and worse. So it's very well received. And I moved out of California. I live in a small town in Utah. I have a little homestead. I garden, I mow, I hike, I ride my bike, e-bike. So it's a little bit of cheating, but nonetheless. It's really nice there. So anybody listening, if you're passing through southern Utah, anywhere near Zion National Park or Bryce Canyon or what formerly was the north rim of the Grand Canyon, unfortunately, the Dragon Bravo fire took care of that this year, and that beautiful um, uh, restaurant and lodge and all that stuff are gone. But if you're in that area, please feel free to reach out to me. And that's my
Yeah.
story. Yeah, and that's my story. I published some papers. I wrote a book called Fearless Pregnancy. I published some papers on breech and home twin delivery, on home birthing, and then I did a case report on a rare situation that sometimes happens with twins. So yeah, it's been a very marvelous career. And if I may take 30 seconds just to give a tribute to one of my mentors who passed away this week, everybody who in the birth world knows about, Michel Audant. I had the privilege of hosting him one time in my apartment, and it's a big loss. So
Yeah, I'm
without
sorry to hear.
without him and mentors like Marcin Wagner and so many other people I don't want to leave out, and all the midwives on whose coattails I followed, because I did not learn probably 80, 90% of what I know right now in residency. I learned it after.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your story is so unique and it's so telling that people can follow what their passion is. And I think that when one of the things was that I went through birth trauma, and that's where I found your podcast actually. And listening to it and stuff, you start realizing like how wrong the system is or how crazy things are. And you don't even realize it in the moment until after the fact, but there's no accountability there, right? And I think that's the one thing is that you're there telling the truth of things and your truth. So I think that that's why a lot of people resonate with you because of their own experiences.
I would agree with that. I mean, what we hear is the same stories you probably hear is women who have a traumatic first birth who then find out that there are other options. It would be really nice to have them find out before their first birth. We just had a guest on from Girls Who Know, Larissa, and it's a really project that I'm looking into getting involved with, and that's getting birth education into middle schools and high schools because these things are generally not talked about in families. Mother, daughter, father, son, father, daughter, mother, son. These things are often topics that are not talked about, or if they are, they're talked about in the way that only way that they know, which is what has been culturally going on for almost 100 years and 3 generations now or more of women who have lost touch with the idea that birth is a natural event. We have been indoctrinated to believe that pregnancy is a medical problem, and that if it wasn't for the advancements in medical science and obstetricians and maternal fetal medicine specialists, that our species might just die off because we wouldn't know how to give birth to babies anymore. And we bought that hook, line, and sinker. And I understand why. I mean, look what happened. Look what we just did in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, the things that we bought into. So
Yeah.
uh, we, yeah, the idea of getting to the population to change it. You and I are going to change one family at a time. And I hope you get letters like I get every day. I get letters from somebody who tells me about the fact that they listened to podcasts, they chose to leave the obstetrical world, and they had the birth that they wanted. Uh, Things don't always work out the way they want. There's no perfect way to go. Hospitals are necessary for a certain percentage of pregnancies. We really do need them. But I can tell you all the deterioration of the health and well-being of our mothers and babies is not because 1% of women are giving birth at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a disproportionate amount of energy put forward by organized medicine to sort of to the Wizard of Oz thing where pay no attention to that man behind the curtain and don't look here, look over there. And so they talk about whenever there's a bad outcome at a home birth, they talk about how terrible it is and how it's wrong. But every day in every hospital, they have outcomes where babies came into the hospital inside their mother at term in perfect condition, and somehow that baby ended up in the NICU and the mom ended up with a cesarean section. And that is considered normal in their
Yes.
world, but not ours.
Well, this is the thing. And I think that I've never had a C-section, but I hear people say I had an elective C-section. And that's what I question is like, even when I asked my OB to be induced because I had uh, a reoccurrent kidney infection for 4 months, I was on antibiotics for over 70 days. He was so hesitant. He was like, well, I don't like doing elective Pitocin. Like you have so many different risks. And he kept going over them with me for like over 10 or 15 minutes, being like, I want you to truly understand. Like, I can't take away your right to ask to be induced, but I want you to understand the risks of it. And the first time I had no issues with my delivery, but my second one, I ended up with postpartum hemorrhage 3 times. I had retained placenta of 16 centimeters. It was like a horrendous thing. And then I just started thinking, like, why did I ever get induced, you know?
Well, because most of us don't know anything. It's like when we take most of us are not mechanics. We take our car to the car dealer and he says, your brake pads are low, you need new brakes. That's probably not true. Now, maybe in a year or two, you might need new brakes, but they're going to try to upsell you with that. And doctors, unfortunately, only know what they're taught, and they are risk averse. They're worried about medical legal consequences, and that is not a false flag for them. They do have that going over their head. They are under lots of pressure. Some of it is financial. Some of it is expediency, time-wise. It's a lot easier to schedule your induction on a Tuesday rather than have you go into labor on Saturday or Sunday when they'd rather not be working. It's a lot easier to schedule your C-section at 7:30 in the morning on a Thursday and be out by 8:20 and back in the office by 9 than it is for them to have to sit around the hospital for hours and potentially hours on end. You even look at the way they deliver your baby and even the term delivering their baby. I mean, we all laugh at that because the woman delivers the baby. Yet with a vaginal delivery, they'll still call it that. But you're placed on your back. You're up in stirrups. They put blue drapes on your legs. They wash your bottom off with betadine. Sometimes some hospitals are getting better about all this. The baby comes out. A lot of places still immediately cut the cord, or at maximum give you 1 minute of delayed cord clamping, which, by the way, is a made-up number. The reason that they have these kind of things is because it's expedient. They don't want to sit there for 30 minutes while the cord is still pulsating.
So why
They,
is that though? Like I asked for them to delay my cord clamping because with my son, I think they did 36 seconds or something. I read my report and it was a really short distance. And I was so adamant, like I wanted to wait until it was white. And they kept saying all of these issues, like they would not do it. And then I eventually was like, okay, fine, because they just wouldn't stop bugging me. And I'm like, I'm in labor and you're bothering me. So okay, fine, just okay, at 1 minute, do it.
they badger you because, again, they've been taught by somebody, generally some consensus opinion of ACOG, which of course we could get into the corruption of science, but consensus opinion means that there's no science to support it. It's just what experts think. And if these experts are all trained at the same institutions like Johns Hopkins or Cedars or Harvard or Stanford, they're all going to group think anyway. So they're going to say these things. But there's no reason in this specific instance that the placenta can't just stay attached. The baby gets it's while it's transitioning, it's still getting its nutrients and oxygen from mom while it's transitioning to the new life. As a matter of fact, nature designed it that way. So man has extreme hubris to believe that we know better than Mother Nature. Now, again, in rare cases, we do. In rare cases, we save babies that otherwise, or mothers that otherwise might have passed away. But what is the damage being done by all these interventions on the mothers and babies who didn't need it? And that's something that's never looked at. The endpoint that they always look at is did we get a live baby? If we got a live baby, we did okay. What happened to the mother down the road, or the baby's immune system down the road, or the baby's latching or breastfeeding, or mother's future babies is not the concern of that obstetrician. And getting back to the point about being I think I'm getting an Amber Alert here. I don't know if you get them in Canada, but
We do.
my phone is going nuts. But getting back to the point about what doctors are trained and they do certain things by routine, because it's just easier to follow the flow than it is to stand up and do something unique for your client and then potentially get yelled at by the nursing staff or the medical executive committee or something next week when they call you in because you didn't follow their protocol. And I just want listeners to know that hospital protocols are hidden behind a facade of safety, but they're put in place to protect the hospital. They're for the safety of the hospital, not the safety of the mother. And
Yeah,
how can I
spot
say
on.
that? How can I say that? All you have to do is look at outcomes. Are they out with all the protocols that we have and all the ultrasounds and all the inductions and all the C-sections, all the continuous fetal monitoring and all the antibiotics and all this stuff? Are our outcomes better now than they were 30, 40, and 50 years ago? And the answer is no, they're not. So I know it's like beating a dead horse, but the true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And what is funny about obstetrics is that not only do they do the same things over and over again, but they add new things in that are getting worse. So I don't even know if that's worse than insanity.
No,
It's
for
like
sure. It's spot on. It's
purposeful.
spot on.
Yeah.
And I've said this so many times that everyone is conditioned now to say, well, my baby is healthy or thriving, so I'm okay. As long as everything is okay in a couple months, it's fine. It's not a big deal. But when you look at it, like, yes, that is a big deal.
Oh, it can set your baby up for a lifetime of issues. And you obviously can be, whether it's overt or subtle, subconsciously things are affected by how you gave birth. A good example is the disempowerment of fathers. The hospital, and again, I'm speaking in general terms. There's always exceptions, and there's always going to be a woman who says, "Yeah, but if I wasn't in the hospital, my baby would have died." That's what they're told, even when it's not true. But sometimes it actually is true. So I want people to take this with a grain of salt that I'm speaking in general terms. Um, but when these things go on in the hospital, they think that they're doing good. They have to think that they're doing good because the alternative is that they know they're doing bad. And I just don't think nurses and doctors want to do bad. But they're under this idea that is, if they follow the rules, they're going to be protected. My mind is so full of examples, but I want to give two examples of things that have kind of been brought into the birth world that just show you how they don't think deeply. These are not deep thinkers that come up with these things. One of them is a labor curve. You've heard of the labor curve, Kia?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a labor curve for first-time moms, and then there's a labor curve for multips. They're slightly different because multips, which are women that have already had at least one vaginal delivery, tend to dilate faster. But ask yourself the question, and why didn't they ask this when Friedman came up with his original curve, is how do you get a curve? A curve is the median of a lot of scatter points. The scatter points on a labor curve have to be vaginal exams. So you have women in the hospital, not natural, probably on their back, getting frequent vaginal exams, and you're going to use that as the standard of how women should labor, which in itself is flawed. But then you realize that the line drawn through it, which becomes the labor curve, which is then used to determine if you fall below the curve, it means you're not moving fast enough, as if there's a definition for that. And so therefore we need to help you along, like maybe we rupture your membranes, or maybe we start Pitocin, or we do things to speed things up because you're not moving fast enough. But if you look at how the curve was originally designed, 50% of the women were below the curve.
Wow.
And 50% were above the curve. That's because the curve is the median or the mean.
Yes.
And so if you're saying that you're not moving fast enough if you're not on the curve, you're basically describing the labor of 50% of the women that were used to create the curve in the first place. How many of us believe that 50% of women's labors are too slow?
Yeah.
So I've never heard a cogent argument against what I just said.
No, you're right. You're spot on with it.
And the second one, which you see happening, is the ever evolving definition of fetal growth restriction. Fetal growth restriction used to be that babies less than the third percentile, and plus or minus some other little factors, maybe blood flow issues and stuff like that. But it was the third percentile. And in 2020, the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine, who is financially conflicted, decided to change the definition to less than the 10th percentile. So they just added a whole, excuse the term, shitload of new clients for them to do weekly or biweekly ultrasounds on, or twice weekly ultrasounds on, generating a lot more revenue. But honestly, look yourself in the mirror and say, do I really believe that 10% of babies born in the United States are growth restricted?
No, there's no way.
There's no way. It's not possible. It defies even, the typical use of standard deviations. I mean, two standard deviations is like 97.5, so 2.5%. So they've used this label because they don't want to miss anybody with growth restriction, which, by the way, they're going to still miss babies with growth restriction because the baby might be at the 80th percentile at 20 weeks, and at 30 weeks it's at the 20th percentile. That baby's falling off its curve, but it's above the 10th percentile. It's not going to be labeled growth restriction. Whereas a baby that's at the 8th percentile at 20 weeks and the 7th percentile at 30 weeks is growing perfectly fine, yet it will be labeled growth restricted. Do they not think this out ahead of time, or are they diabolical in just basically being an industrial lobby, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, to come up with a scheme to find more women that have to be seen by maternal fetal medicine doctors? And again, I've never had anybody prove that, say anything that's proven me wrong there, because when you lower it to 10, when you raise it to 10 percentile, you're going to have a lot of false positives. And you're going to be scaring a lot of women who don't need to be scared. And they're going to be going through the last months of their pregnancy in fight or flight. as opposed to joy and love and peace, because now they have to go in all the time. They're worried that, and then they're going to get that push toward what? Induction.
Medical, and yes.
Yeah, induction of labor. And of course, that is not innocuous. They act like it is, but for some reason, and again, I was at a conference once, or I was listening online to a conference once, where two snarky maternal fetal medicine doctors were supposedly having debate about the benefits of inducing at 39 weeks, which later came out 2 years later at the Arrive trial. It was almost as if they had sort of planned the whole thing, rolling out the red carpet so that they could announce the Arrive trial a couple of years later. But they were speaking to an audience of obstetricians. And when you have a debate, you usually have one person on one side and one person on the other side. Like point counterpoint used to be on television, that sort of thing. But that wasn't the case. It turned out that they were secretly both in favor of the 39-week induction. And then one of the guys, I think his name was Errol Norwich, who was the head of an East Coast residency program at the time, said something I'll never forget. He said that that nature is a lousy obstetrician. And the whole audience laughed. And I'm thinking, do you realize what you just said? You're saying that obstetricians are smarter and wiser than nature. And look at your outcomes.
Oh, for sure.
So they don't look at their outcomes. They look at ways to intervene, to get things to move along. Back to the whole idea of why you get less than only a minute of cord clamping is because they don't have time to sit there for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Whereas in the home birth model, we do. We're in no hurry to go anywhere. We don't have to go into the next room or down to the ER or to the call room to take a nap. We're in your home and we can delay it as long as possible. And they'll come up with these crazy things like, well, the baby will get too much blood and then it'll be jaundiced, or it'll have a term called polycythemia. It's like, no, this is the baby's blood. Nature has designed the baby to get this blood. If you weren't here, this is what nature would have given that baby. The only reason that the baby's not getting it is because you're here and you're in a hurry to get on to the next task. Oh, now you've got to do the stitching and you've got to write the orders, and then you've got to get on to the next room because you're in a busy labor ward. And the individualization and the sanctity and the sovereignty of the woman are not of value in that system.
So I have so many thoughts on this, but the first thing that I'm wondering is, do you think that birthing clinics or birthing places that are not hospitals are better than hospitals, or do they kind of still have the same practices?
Well, it depends. Some birth centers that are affiliated with hospitals are going to be under the guidelines of the risk management team of the hospital, and they're going to be stuck with the same thing. And many midwives now, the name is it's a tough name, and you're seeing some people say they're surrendering the name because they know that the name has been corrupted. That many midwives are very medicalized now, and many of the traditional, not the traditional, but the conventional midwifery schools are becoming very medicalized. They're pushing the COVID vaccine. They're pushing vaccines on pregnant women. They're not doing the things that midwives would have done if they learned in a traditional fashion. And so you can't just go by the title of it. Oh, it's a birth center. It's going to be better than a hospital. Most birth centers are, but the best place to have a baby is with a skilled midwife outside of the hospital. For probably the majority of women, I would say 70, 80% of women do not need the hospital. The hospital is detrimental to them, but they don't feel safe at home because culturally they've been indoctrinated to believe that it's not safe to have babies at home. But those of us who have either grown up through that system or, as me, transferred into that system, I realized that I don't think we could be doing any worse with our outcomes than we are right now if suddenly 80% of babies were stayed out of the hospital. I think the outcomes would be better. I don't think we'd have 10% of babies going to the NICU, and I don't think we'd have 60% of babies having some chronic illness. I mean, there's many factors for that, but certainly our immune systems begin in the womb and are certainly imprinted at the time of birth when you're exposed to the mother's microbiome or not exposed to the microbiome. So we see that it would be nice if we could do that, but then we need the hospitals for that 10 or 20% of women who need it, and hospitals would go bankrupt if they couldn't make money off the 80% who don't need it. So
well, I don't mean to interrupt, but I did hear you say on one of your other podcasts that giving all women blood work before they have a baby is not necessary. And I am actually super interested in that because like when you think about it, so many people that I know did not have issues have with their birth or anything. I mean, maybe they suffered with postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, or they suffered with, low iron or something after their vaginal delivery that went very smooth. Why do you think that is, especially in Canada? Like, I don't know how the system works for billing here because I know it's separate because we have like a universal healthcare through OHIP. But how does that work? Like, do they really make money off every single thing that they do?
Yeah, even in socialized medical systems, and I don't know if that's what you'd call yours, but in many countries in Europe and stuff like that, yeah, the hospital bills, instead of billing the insurance company or the patient, the hospital bills the government with the proper codes that, again, coding and billing are a whole nother scam. There's a whole nother industry. There's an American Academy of billing coders. It's like we need an academy for that. What are we talking about here? But yeah, it's a $1 billion industry, coding. But yes, if you're a Canadian hospital does a complete blood count, right? They send a bill to through a computer, through coding, to whoever in your government is responsible for reimbursing doctors and hospitals through your system, and they break it down that way. It's I don't think that even in Canada that doctors get or hospitals get a set fee for every woman that comes in labor. I think if a woman has a cesarean section, that hospital gets paid more than if a woman has a vaginal delivery. Even if the vaginal delivery required more time spent in the hospital laboring, more time for staffing, because that woman was laboring for 27 hours in the hospital, more supplies for all the chucks and IVs and things that they use, they're going to get paid less. So the incentives are all wrong to try to actually lower the C-section rate because hospitals will make less money. And no one I've spoken a lot about this, and I have a lot of Canadian friends, a lot of British friends. No one's ever told me, Stu, you're wrong. They do these things. It doesn't matter but it does matter because that's how these things are paid to the hospital. So when a woman comes in labor, whether it's in Canada or the United States, there are certain protocols that they follow for every single woman. There's no individualization of care. I've seen them trying to draw blood on a woman that's crowning.
Wow.
I mean, that's an extreme example, but if you've heard me talk about this, but I'll just say it for your listeners. When you come to the hospital, some of the things they routinely do, like they make you go pee in a cup and change into a hospital gown, generally, not all. Sometimes they're letting you wear your own jammies now and they're not doing them. But why does a pregnant woman who's doing fine have to pee in a cup? Why does she need her blood drawn? Why does she need an IV? They do it. It's routine that all of them get it. And they say, well, we can't get you admitted until we get your blood drawn. We can't, and you have to answer all these questions first so we can get you admitted, so we can send your blood to the lab. And we want to know what your hemoglobin is. It's like, well, I'm walking in, my heart's beating fine. If my hemoglobin is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, what difference does it make at that point that you have to interrupt me to stick a needle in my arm and take blood out of my system? And then we have to send a clot down to the blood bank just in case you need a transfusion, which is about 1 to 3 per 1,000 women in labor. But what do they do if you came in with an abruption hemorrhaging, or what do they do if you came in with a car accident with a severed artery or something like that? They would find O negative blood for you, and they would get blood for you, and they didn't have a blood clot in place, and they could do that. But no, if 1 into 3 per 1,000 women are transfused, and we draw a type and screen on 1,000 women, we made a lot of money that we didn't need.
Yeah, that
And
makes a lot of sense.
and so they upcharge everything. And again, I know I'm speaking in terms of the United States, but I'm certain in England and Canada, it's the same way that you just bill the government instead of billing Blue Cross or the HMO or whatever. But the other thing that's crazy about that is that you go to a home birth and a woman's in labor. Nobody makes her pee in a cup to send, because you can send that to the lab and bill for that. And nobody draws her blood. And most always nobody starts an IV. And as I've said in that podcast, and miraculously, these women and their babies live. So
With less medical intervention too, right?
yeah, I mean, if it's so important to do it on every single woman, how is it possible that we don't do it at home and women do just fine?
Yeah.
If you need it, draw it, but individualize your care. But the hospital model doesn't allow doctors and nurses to think independently. I feel for my colleagues. Nurses go through years of training and doctors go through more years of training only to come out to be told by administrative personnel and risk managers how our hospital practices, and if you want to work here, you do it our way. So every woman gets these blood tests. And if a hospital system like in Kaiser in Southern California doesn't want women to go past 41 weeks, now it might even be less. They might have adopted the Arrive trial for all I know, but the 39-week thing. But so a doctor knows perfectly well it's perfectly fine for a woman to go past 41 weeks. A decent percentage of women will, and yet they have to skew their counseling to funnel them down the path that the hospital system wants them to take, as opposed to what the woman wants. And so they badger them and they bully them and they coerce them using things like, well, your placenta could give out, you're over 35-year-old, stillbirth is right around the corner. And once you mention the stillbirth word to a woman, you've taken her greatest fear and you're using it as a weapon, because every parent's greatest fear is losing their child.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very manipulative. In our model, I will tell you that there are midwives that do that often aren't as ethical as they should be and use coercion too. But for the most part, the midwives that I work with and I know, we all admit we have a bias, and we make it very clear to our client that we have a bias. Whereas doctors live in an authoritative world where they think that they're right, and therefore they don't even have to admit that they have a bias. The medical system is in an ethical intersection here. I mean, it's been that way for decades now, and ethics is losing. The things that you're taught if you take a basic ethics class are that it's essentially what's called beneficence-based ethics, where you're supposed to do for the good of your client. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your client, and that if your client chooses to hear you out and say, no, I don't want to do that, then you have an ethical responsibility to support their decision. Now, support could look like, I can't support you on that because I don't know how to do breech birth, but I'll help you find somebody who does, as opposed to saying, breech is dangerous, the head will get stuck, the cord will prolapse, your baby will die. So you have to have a C-section, right? So rather than doing the ethical thing, doctors are often using coercion, whether they know it or not. And the fact if they don't know it, that's a statement on being oblivious of something is not an excuse for it. So they have to know that they're doing things that are unethical. And a woman has the right to say no. And we're supposed to honor that. And we're supposed to honor that.
So on that note,
yeah.
So for vitamin K, because I think that this is so controversial, and I know so many people who swear they would never give their baby it. Some people swear they would never go without it. Why is it so controversial? Is it truly necessary? What is it about vitamin K that medical systems are so adamant about?
Well, this is a good question to have right now, because there's this very popular influencer. I have no idea how she got so popular, who just put out a video recently about how the risk of vitamin K deficiency bleeding is 1 in 60.
I've seen that. That's what I was going to ask about.
Everybody's seen that video now. She's always wearing a surgical hat too. I don't quite understand why these. I guess it's like costuming.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I got my T-shirt. I got my good middle of the night T-shirt on, so I guess I'm guilty of it too. But let's talk about vitamin K. You have to get back to whether or not you trust nature's design. Because if nature thought vitamin K was necessary for newborns, then nature would have figured out a way for vitamin K to be manufactured in newborns or be transferred from the mother across the placenta to the baby in adequate amounts to affect the clotting system in the proper way. But nature didn't do that, and nature isn't stupid. So maybe if we take a step back from our egos and think that, well, maybe for most babies, having low vitamin K is maybe beneficial for the first week or so, until your gut bacteria kick in and start making vitamin K. I mean, if you look at the Jewish ritual of circumcision, it's done on the 8th day of life. There was a reason for that. I mean, part of it, I was taught that they wanted to make sure the baby was going to survive and stuff like that. But isn't it coincidental that that's about the time that baby's own production of vitamin K? So when you're going to chop off the foreskin, the baby has better clotting mechanisms. I don't know. But the kosher laws and things like that in Judaism are actually fascinating, but not part of our conversation today. But nature has a design. So what is this? What is the worry? Well, the worry is something called vitamin K deficiency bleeding, all right? And there's an early onset and there's a late onset. The early onset is almost always caused by medications that the mother or baby are taking, generally the mother. Like seizure medication is a common thing that you might see that. And this is where the indication, where that influencer said that it's 1 in 60. If you look at the CDC results for vitamin K, early onset vitamin K deficiency bleeding, it's 1 in 60 to 1 in 250. So she's even being a bit disingenuous by choosing the 1 in 60 number rather than the 1 in 200 or 1 in 250 number. But she's skewing her thing because this is what she believes. But the truth is, if a mother is on seizure medication, then maybe giving vitamin K to the baby is a good idea. But that's not why vitamin K is given to most babies. Most babies get vitamin K to prevent what's called late onset vitamin K deficiency bleeding, which happens days or weeks down the road. And that incidence is about 6 per 100,000. Or if you break that down, it's about 1 in 16,000 and change. Oh. So what a mother has to decide, well, parents have to decide, is if I'm not on seizure medication or some other medication that may affect vitamin K early on, then is 1 in 16,000 a reason to give my baby something that may or may not be safe? It's got, it doesn't have mercury in it. It doesn't have, aluminum in it. It's got, other chemicals in it and things like that. And it's certainly a noxious stimulus to give to your 1-hour-old baby in its thigh. And the dose is essentially the same whether your baby weighs 5 pounds or 10 pounds, which is I always wonder about that in vaccines when you give the same, because every other medicine you give to a baby is based on its weight, but not vitamin K and not vaccines. It comes in an ampule and you just give it. But you have to decide, is the 1 in 16,000 risk worth taking to defy nature's design for the other 15,999? And is there a downside to giving vitamin K? And if nature decided that vitamin K isn't really necessary, then maybe there's a benefit for babies to have, like, poor example, but say thinner, more watery blood where it's less clotty blood. And maybe because the baby's still forming neurons in its brain and other parts of its body, and it's got these tiny little blood vessels, they don't want the blood to be sort of thick and coagulate. That's the wrong word. And just coagulate. They don't want that to happen. So maybe nature knew that. So are we altering things? And the question is, has anyone looked to see if there's a downside to giving vitamin K to the 15,999 babies who don't need it? And the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think there have been any safety studies or randomized controlled trials on newborns, some getting vitamin K, some getting saline, and seeing downstream if there's any complications. And now that it's become obviously accepted as the standard of care, anybody wanting to do that will probably not be able to pass human subjects ethics issues. So the studies it's a perfect Mobius strip of illogic that it just goes round and round and round, and you can't do this because it's standard, but we never prove that it's safe, but you can't do it because it's standard, and on the argument goes. So this influencer was being very dishonest in her presentation.
So we're going to pause it there, and we will be back next week for part 2.